Welcome to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project, where we're creating the blueprint to help you become the best human you can be so you can give your gifts back to the world. I'm your guide and fellow optimizer, Christopher Camp. In our world of constant stimulation and distraction, the ability to focus deeply is becoming a lost art. Although it may be more challenging to focus these days, this doesn't mean that it's less important. In fact, being able to focus on the task at hand is one of the most critical skills needed for success. If you can master your ability to focus, it can be an absolute game changer for you in our modern society that struggles so much with this. Accordingly, the title of our session today is The Power of Focus: How to Lock in an Increasingly Distracted World. Our expert guest today is Manish Goyal, the Chief Operating Officer of Mayo Clinic Platform. He's responsible for refining and executing the platform's strategic and operational plans, recruiting executive and expert talent, and developing the systems, processes, and infrastructure needed to support the platform ecosystem. He has a very diverse professional background spanning finance, investing, operations, product development, venture capitalism, and engineering. He's previously served as the Chief Solutions Officer and Chief Corporate Development Officer at Welltalk, a managing director at Miramar Venture Partners, a prominent early-stage investment firm specializing in technology information. Mr. Goyal holds a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute, master's degree in electrical engineering, and an MBA. He's accomplished a lot in a lot of different places, and one of his superpowers for being so successful and productive is his ability to maintain precise focus over long periods of time. So, Manish, thank you so much for joining us today. We really look forward to having this discussion with you.
Thank you for having me. This is gonna be fun.
So to keep us organized, we like to structure our discussion around three big questions that we're going to answer really over the course of the next 40 minutes. Our first big question today is, what is focus and why is it so important for our productivity and joy? The second big question is, why do we all seem to struggle to focus in today's world? And then the last big question, we'll start to get into some solutions with this one. What concrete steps can we take to improve our focus in our world of constant interruption? Does that sound like a fair plan?
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's dive in. So we'll start in our first section here where we're kind of going to define things. So I'd like to first just start by defining focus. So how do you define focus and what are the key elements to it?
So I think to me, focus is really about being present. It's where you have turned off. As we think about our mental space, there are constant tugs in every direction. We all play very, very different roles in our lives. We are parents, we're children, we're siblings, we're employees, or volunteers, and all of those occupy mental space in our head. And it's not like you can go from work mode to parent mode rapidly. Those things are always present, even though they're muted. So to me, flow is about really elevating what role you're playing, what you're trying to accomplish at that moment, and reducing the noise from all of your other roles. To me, that's actually focus.
And I do think in our world today, we're getting more and more of those external things that are clamoring for our attention and stealing our focus. So one of the elements that you mentioned in there was we have to intentionally kind of decide what it is we're looking at and paying attention to, which I think can be incredibly challenging, trying to sift through what we should actually be focusing on because so much of it is external. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. I also want to talk about some of the benefits of focus. I think much of this is obvious to our listeners. And obviously, if you can focus, you're going to get your work done faster. And that's kind of clear and everybody understands that. But there are a lot more benefits to focus just beyond getting the work done quickly. What are some other key benefits that we need to be aware of?
First of all, if you want to get better at something, you do need to put a concentrated energy focus. I do think that there's a secondary aspect that we don't often talk about, right? So when we accomplish something that we have certain level of dedication to, the output requires less out of us, and I think it creates less stress. And the perfect example of that is trying to do five things at the same time. We talk about that as multitasking. The sum total of the energy of those five things being done at the same time produces an elevated stress. And so your satisfaction out of accomplishing those five things, if you did them at the same time versus doing them independently, is going to be the stress level is going to be higher. So the total cost on you as a person is going to be higher. I think we forget about that fact and we think, oh, wow, I accomplished five things at the same time, but we carry that weight coming out of it rather than really going from one activity completing it to a certain point. And that to me is something that, again, I think as a society we've sort of lost touch with.
Yeah, I do think that high price we pay for trying to do multiple things at once is immense. And we look at, you know, increasing rates of stress and decreasing joy and more burnout. And I certainly think that contributes to it a lot. And I also think that that added stress you're talking about, not only will it reduce our performance, but I think it kind of stifles our creativity as well. So our ability to do big thinking and sort of get outside of the box and really innovate and get creative, I think is also hampered when we're not focusing. We're trying to balance multiple things and we have increased levels of stress.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. In many ways, society is glamorizing doing multiple things. So I don't know if you've read into what companies like the companies that Elon Musk runs, right? So a hyper successful person, and it's interesting. Society's move towards glamorizing these kinds of people versus 30, 40, 50 years ago. I think the focus and our energy was a little different. And if you look at this person, he's first of all, I have an immense amount of respect, but he's a CEO of multiple companies. And you start to see that being mimicked in some way, in a smaller way. Um, when you step back and say, well, okay, maybe he can accomplish that. Maybe he's that N of one kind of person. We're all not cut the same way. And I think you also have to think about focus and your ability to manage either multitasking or the level of focus based on what you're capable of. And I think part of this is also we have a different place in that spectrum that we all sit. And we all assume that we can do more because we all aspire to do, we have these, models of archetypes that we model ourselves after. And that's also something that, is a constant pressure beyond the normal tactical things like your cell phones or TV, etc.
It is interesting. We often look at these others that we think are doing such a good job of this and doing what we think is multitasking. And from the outside, they can look incredibly successful and impressive. But oftentimes, when you ask them, they're exhausted. And Elon Musk is a great example. He'll tell you, and he said many times that he is exhausted and he's had to stop doing things just out of pure sheer exhaustion. And so I think sometimes we don't understand the price that's being paid for that. And we have to be really careful not to look to others to define success for us, but to be intentional in defining success for ourselves.
Yeah.
And until we do that, I don't think we can really determine intentionally what we're going to focus on either. So I think that those things go hand in hand, and I really like what you're saying.
Yeah.
So one of the other related concepts to focus is this concept of flow. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is, talked a lot about that and written about that. And we have another session coming out on the Human Optimization Project. It's going to be dedicated specifically to flow. But I think it's at least worth mentioning here because they are somewhat related to the concepts of flow and focus. So how do you see those two as being the same or different?
Flow to me is where you almost enter the state where all those noise factors that I described earlier reduce. So if you're old enough to remember what equalizers are, right? If you're an audiophile, equalizers with these little knobs that you can turn up the bass, turn up the treble. Um, so to me, focus is about turning down those frequencies that you don't necessarily want to hear. Maybe you just want to hear the bass, but reduce everything else. I think focus is a necessary step towards flow. And I think once you get into the habit of actually getting to focus, you start to get into this flow state. And I'll give you a couple of personal examples. Uh, and I mention this because it changes over time, right? Our environment's changing, our own skills are changing. I used to get this state of flow where I was a runner. I was a long distance runner and still like long distance running. But when I was running, I would tune out. I would basically be focused on one foot at a time. My gaze would be 5 or 7 or 8 feet in front of me, and that's it. I would not really be paying attention to anything else, and I would get lost. I would literally get lost, and sometimes and just keep running. I found over time, for whatever reason, that the noise was coming back into my running, right, where I could no longer tune it out. So I tried music, right? I couldn't escape it. So I transitioned to other activities, and I did this because I think part of flow is to reset your brain, is to relax your brain and to give you time to rest in a non-sleeping state. And what I found was that actually interesting two activities that are unrelated that I find a state of flow. Golf. So if you've ever played golf, you have to be in that moment. You have to have a process. Golf is very disciplined. It's if you play it, which is same set of steps you complete, and you kind of do this mental checklist, and you forget about everything else. The second activity is rock climbing. My daughter and I go rock climbing, and you cannot be thinking about that stressful meeting that you had at work that day. You have to be focused on the next hold. And that to me is starting to get into being present, being focused, but also being in a state of flow where you're now one with an activity, where everything else just disappears. And I can tell you that once you complete those things, whether you hit a shot, good or bad, or you do a climb, you have this immediate sense of positive endorphins that come with flow, that I wish on everybody.
That's great, Manish. I mean, we ran through your list of professional accomplishments earlier. I didn't realize that you were such an athlete too. I mean, it's unbelievable all the things you're up to.
Uh,
But I think those are phenomenal analogies, and I agree completely. I do think flow, those activities tend to be ones that naturally draw you in, hook you in. It sort of becomes automatic, and you slide into it. You lose sense of time. Focus, I often think of something that has to be, it's a little bit less automatic. Unfortunately, sometimes it requires some intentional effort. Sometimes it's challenging or difficult. It may not be as fun or joyful as flow, if you don't do it well. So I do think definitely related, but separate from one another. I love the sports analogies that you did. One of the other questions I have is around timing of focus. And so most of us can focus for a little bit. So our problem is not necessarily that we can't focus at all. It's just that we have a hard time focusing long enough. So is there a certain ideal time cycle or length of time that we should be aiming for when we're trying to focus?
it's a really good question, and I frankly have struggled with that for most of my life. And it's an honest assessment of the fact that one of my, I'd say, superpowers. So everybody's got a superpower. One of the, as a side note, one of the things I learned from former board member colleague of mine was that each of us has a superpower, and that is either you're great at finance, deals, surgery, a special kind of surgery, whatever it is, that's your superpower. And you build yourself around that, right? So that's a part of you. And it can be anything. I found my superpower is to be able to take lots of complex ideas and distill them down into the salient, simplified way of articulating and creating a strategy around that. And so my brain tends to work in a lot of randomized ways. And So it takes a lot of energy for me to focus. As I get older, as the number of activities and different roles, as I mentioned, get more complex, like teenage kids, uh, it becomes harder. And so what I've found is that I need all distractions to stop. And I can do this for about 1 to 2 hours at specific times of the day. It is typically at very early morning times, like 2, 3 in the morning, when the world is mostly asleep, in the United States at least. Uh, it's dark, it's quiet, and I have the most amount of focused activity at that point in time. But that's what it takes for me. Some people can tune everything out, but you have to figure it out yourself from a timing standpoint and how much you're willing to give to get that maximum time. I do this with, and my exchange is a little bit less sleep on certain days. So I think it is a very personal question that you're asking, and you have to figure out what the trade offs are that you're willing to make in your life.
What a great answer. So it really varies within individuals, and it also varies across individuals. So no two people are the same. And honestly, even within the same person, at some point in your life, your ability to do it might be greater than it is at other points. And so I think that's great. I think with all things we talk about here on the Human Optimization Project, though, it's one of those where you probably need to start small and sort of start making some small progress and start stacking wins. So I would say for people that are new on this journey, let's keep low expectations and we're going to ease into this process. So moving to our second section here and talk about why it's such a struggle for us. So overall as a society, do you feel like we're getting better or worse at focusing?
I think we're getting, well, certainly, I think it's getting worse. If you go back 40 years ago, if you're old enough to be going back 40 years ago and remember, your distractions were your family, your friends, that phone that was attached permanently to the wall that you had to share with everybody in your household, and a TV that was shared amongst everybody in your household, and very limited set of choices. And you fast forward, we are always connected. We're in the precipice of actually having always on connectivity right into our brain. And so the problem is that we haven't evolved to create those filters, those gateways that protect our time. And so distractions like those pings that we get from our cell phone, or Insta, or Facebook, or email, or Teams, there's an endless number of things, and it's constantly increasing. There was this great cover in Time magazine, I want to say about 15 years ago, and it had YouTube, right? The YouTube had just become sort of a mainstream concept, and they had the YouTube TV logo, but they had, inside of it, it said you. And basically their premise was that you're at the center of this. You have infinite choice. You're the star, right? And that, our infinite choice architecture, has a cost. It's allowing us to have mass customization of our things, but that means someone's got to curate that. And unfortunately, we are the only ones that can curate our time. And I think that it's just getting more and more complicated. If you look at the last 18 months, the mainstreamization of our generative AI projects with ChatGPT, instead of going to and memorizing something, now you are, oh, what is that fact? Or what is that concept? Let me go check it. That mental shift is enough of a distraction for you to go out of a conversation or out of a thought into something completely different. So I'll just say I think technology plays a complicated role. Our work styles play a complicated role because now we're very dispersed as a society versus coming into a single building and having that organizational flow. And I think our family dynamics are very different too, right? If you look at how people spent their times, you'll see these if you do a search. People spent a majority of their time, 60, 70% of their time, with family, and today it's primarily on self. It's not the perfect self, but it is self, and then next is work and such. So I think the level of distraction has gotten to a point that if we don't start really doing an active job of curating our time, we have a hard time focusing on anything.
Very well said. I think all those things you mentioned, the advances in technology, how our work culture has changed, there's obviously a lot of clear benefit to that and some tremendous, wonderful things that have come out of it. But it is a double edged sword, without question. And things are designed to take as much of our time as possible. Everything is designed in that way. So we have to be very thoughtful and intentional now more than ever to take ownership of our time and take agency in what we give our attention to and what we try to focus on. So if we don't do a good job of that, can you take me through what are some of the downsides of not being able to focus?
Well, I mean, I think you covered off on some of those earlier, right? Your joy goes out the window, no matter what you're doing. If you're transitioning from activity to activity, there are switching costs. We have all had a day where there are enough meetings on our calendar that are unrelated, and you're going from meeting to meeting. You have that moment where you're wrapping up a meeting with a train of thought, right? It's maybe a 30-minute meeting, so you get into the flow of that meeting, or that you're focused on that meeting, and choose those words specifically, and then you're done, and you have to process that conversation, make a mental note, write it down, whatever it is, and then you've got to now warm up to that. Those transition had such immense workload to our brains that you lose joy out of that, because those switching tasks is really hard. Second, you it does become much more taxing, because on those days, I guarantee anyone that's had those kinds of days, you feel that much more exhausted by the end of the day. And I think the question is, those warm up and warm down times require their wasted time, right? So it's sort of like, I have a teenage daughter. At every now and then at 7 or 8 p.m., she'll be like, "Oh, can we make some cookies?" So great. What do you need to make cookies? You need to put all the ingredients together. You need to make the dough. You need to warm up the oven. And at some point, my wife is like, "Well, we're not going to do this all the time because it takes effort. You got to clean the kitchen and all that." So we just pre-made the dough. So you broke up that activity, you made the dough, froze it, and so when she's interested in fresh cookies, you can take the dough out, drop them on the cookie sheet, and you're done. That breaking up allows you to be um, thoughtful about how you spend your time. And I use that analogy and say, those transition steps, if you can start to remove them and spread them out, and focus specific activities at specific times, I think we become a little better.
Well, I think those analogies are good. And you talk about coming in and out of meetings and, scheduling time to, do fun things, baking cookies and all of that. And really, a lot of that comes down to being intentional and thoughtful with our time, scheduling things so that we have enough time to focus, we have enough time to do the task at hand. I wonder though if some people have a sense of guilt about doing that, or maybe feel that they're not allowed to, or they're not worthy of saying, okay, I'm gonna have this 30-minute meeting, but then I'm gonna block off 15 minutes for myself afterwards to put all my thoughts together and collect it so that I can move on. So what are your thoughts on that? Should we be feeling guilty about taking dedicated time to focus on activities?
No, it's a really good point. I would say your only commodity in life is time. When you stop and think about it, right? Your intelligence, your looks, your personality are all secondary to the time you're willing to give, because we all have limited time on the planet. And so the question is, how do we choose to spend that time? And I think the question around, should we feel guilty, is again a function of the fact that you have a limited amount of time on this planet, and you can choose in sort of the first 15 or so years, you have limited control because you're being shepherded by your parents. The last x number of years, God willing, are going to be easier, but there are going to be challenges on those. And so there's a period of your life where you have control and you have ability, for most of us. And so the way I would answer this is that if you have a certain set of goals, then you have to figure out how to spend your time. One of the best pieces of advice I got early on in my career was, if you think about the total number of minutes and seconds, if you look at that and you say, okay, I want to spend a third of my time resting and resetting. I want to spend a third of my time with my family and friends, and I want to spend a third of my time working. I'm just making that up. So then you start to break that up and say, okay, of that third of my time in work, for instance, I know I have to dedicate this much time to actually doing work, this much time to meetings. If we got to look at your calendar and say, is that really happening? My guess is most of us would not see that it's actually happening. So, uh, and I would again answer your question and say that is, should you feel guilty? No, because if you're trying to accomplish something that you're tasked to do, I think you have to be very deliberate as to how you spend your time. And that changes with role, right? As you get into a managerial, supervisorial role, you're going to have more time dedicated to managing people, or versus if you're, you know, frontline employee or colleague. And as you get further into executive role, I think your efforts change, but you still have to carve out time to focus on yourself, but also on what you need to get accomplished. So deliberate management of your time. It's interesting. I've got a 17-year-old son, and I said, I can't impart on you values because those are already ingrained in you, good and bad. I can't impart on you intelligence. You've got what you've got. What I can teach you is time management, because most people don't learn that until later on in life. And I think because society will always make you feel guilty. I said, your friends will always say, come on out, go play tennis. Or your boss will be like, oh, can you stay an hour longer? You have to make those boundaries and decide on when you give and take, but you can't feel guilty because society will always take.
Well, I think it can be really challenging for us too, because all of the things you just mentioned that are competing for our time and interest and focus are good things. So, going out with your friends, or playing tennis, or, finishing that project at work, or mentoring somebody who knocks on your door with a question, or answering this important email. That's part of the challenge to me, is say, all right, I look at all the things I'm doing. For the most part, they're all really good things, and they're valuable, and I think they're meaningful, and I hope they're helping to make the world a better place in some small way. But at the same token, you cannot do all of them. And so I think that we have guilt about not doing this thing that's good, but we don't realize that we're not doing this thing that's good because we're choosing to do the other thing that is also good. And so, in a lot of ways, if all of the things that you're looking at and are competing for your interest are good, then it's relatively neutral, and you should be able to decide without feeling guilty about it. Now, if you're choosing a bad thing over a good thing, then that's a little bit of a different story. But that's one thing I would encourage people to think about, is to say, okay, yes, there's somebody knocking on my door, or some opportunity here that I wish I could do that I'm having to say no to, and that's a good opportunity. But if I'm saying no to that because I'm choosing to focus on another or different good opportunity, there's no reason for guilt there. You're just going to choose the thing that better aligns with your meaning and values, and gives you purpose. So now let's talk a little bit about how we actually do that. I want to transition into our third section, and hopefully we can start offering up some solutions for people. So first, I want to ask, do you think, you mentioned earlier that time management is a skill that you can learn. Do you think focus specifically is a skill that can be learned?
I think it is. I think focus, deliberate, and meaningful attachment to what you're doing, they're all skills, right? So we go to school, and we learn math, and we learn, medicine, we learn business, whatever it is. Part of what is also hopefully being learned, and I don't think we overtly call it out, which is a shame, is how to get focus. How do you actually focus on an activity? Uh, I think everything from elementary school all the way to graduate education, professional education, could actually be, we could introduce that as a concept because it is a constant challenge in society. You have to figure out how to adapt and practice that. Some people do that through through meditation or yoga. Those are sort of extreme versions and don't apply to everybody. I I think that if you're going to get good at anything, if you're going to become an expert, that you need to do 10,000 hours to become an expert. Okay, well, you could do those 10,000 hours putzing around on that activity, or you can actually be focused on it. The point of that is that you need to actually have enough repetitions, right? You need to create those rocks in the road, and that only happens if you are committed to something and have there's these concepts, the words that we're using, commitment, deliberateness. Those are necessary in order for you to develop focus. And I think once you get really good at it, you can get into a focus setting and almost get to the flow state very quickly. And so those transition steps become shorter, but you have to spend a lot of time. And to your point earlier, you got to start small and you just have to practice a little bit every day.
Perfect. So we're going to outline those steps for people or give some examples. But before we do, there's two things I want to mention. One is that I think it's tempting for people to look at this and say focus is really challenging or almost impossible, so I'm not going to do it. I would actually say that the fact that it is really hard or challenging is actually one of the reasons you should do it, because we live in a world where it is very difficult for people to do it. So if you can be one of the individuals that does focus and can get deep work done, it's going to be a major separator for you, from the rest of the world. And so it can be a tremendous benefit. That's one point I want to make. The second point I want to make, we talk about 10,000 hours for expert performance. We don't expect anybody to become an expert overnight. And part of this is, if the worse you are at it, the smaller the thing you need to do to actually start to see some marginal improvement. So even with baby steps, and you start to do this just a little bit, you'll start to reap some of the biggest benefits when you're early on in that learning curve. So those are two pieces of encouragement I want to give to the audience as we transition in and start talking about different tricks and techniques. So now that we know that the value of focus is immense, and we know that it's a trainable skill and it's something people can get better at and they should get better at, what are some suggestions you would give people as they start out? So when they say, all right, what do I actually need to do to lock in and focus?
There are some things that are simple that we almost forget about. I can feel my stress level in a sort of a latent and in the background, and going up when I just look at my desk. So we all have a desk that we spend time on, and you look on that, and what happens with all of us is that it starts to pile up with random things, right? And I say one of the simplest thing you can do is to clean your environment, your visual field, because every single thing has a message that it's trying to deliver to you. It is trying to steal some percentage of your time. Remember, time's the only commodity. And so by removing those things, you remove those distractions. It's sort of like driving down a freeway. If you didn't have all those signs, and you were driving through the woods, your stress level is a lot lower. But you drive through, busy cities, and there's signs and billboards, and they're distracting. You're forced. We're ingrained to read them, and so clean up your visual field is probably the simplest thing that you can do, and keep it clean. It's not a one done thing. It will naturally pile up, and you got to just put something on your calendar and say, clean my visual field.
So I'm going to put a plug. We actually have an upcoming episode that's literally all about optimizing your surroundings for productivity. And so I've dug into this. The data on that is unbelievable. I mean, it is shocking to me. So I'll tell our listeners, do it. It sounds simple, but do it. A messy desk is like a sloppy physical to-do list. You don't want it. So yeah, I love that. So start by cleaning your desk in your area. That's a great one. What are some other simple steps?
Yeah, and I think you alluded to it earlier. Put enough breaks in your calendar. One of the things I do is throughout the day I just have 30-minute holds. They're considered a mental relief valve, but it's also a moment to do something that we normally would if we were a on premise environment. And I do a lot of remote work, so some of these are tuned to remote work. But that 15, 20, 30-minute block allows you to take a moment, go walk outside for a second, and slow your brain down, slow the activities down. There's also a lot of literature out there that being outside, looking at nature has this immense amount of freeing and creativity inducing activity in your brain. So when you come back almost not just supercharged, but almost have new connections in your brain. So I try to put blocks on my calendar to do that. Now, sometimes those get taken with meetings, but by doing that, if you hold on to those blocks for 70, 80% of the time, it allows you a moment of whatever it is you want to fill that time with. I think it's really important. And you really, to your point earlier, you can't feel guilty because um, we're still human, right? We're productivity engines because society will want us to be productivity engines, right? Your kids will want something out of you. Your spouses will want something out of you. Your employer's going to want something out of you. But you have to have those self moments for self care.
And that's something I think you can easily automate. I mean, you can just make a rule for yourself that if somebody wants a 20-minute meeting, I'm going to find a 30-minute slot where I'm available, 20 minutes for meeting, 10 minutes to decompress. Or if it's a 30-minute meeting, I'm going to add 15 minutes every time. So I need a 45-minute block available to schedule a 30-minute meeting. So you can make that automatic. That's a great suggestion. I also love the time outside and the time in nature. I actually put that as a separate item on my list too, because I think that's immensely helpful as well.
One of the other things that we learned during COVID was in an increasingly Zoom or Teams filled world, it is easy to just put your meetings right up against the half hour mark. What we realized is that most meetings are 30 minutes because of the fact that our planet rotates around the on its axis, and so it's kind of arbitrary at the end of the day. What we did is just started and said we're and off of my calendar, all my meetings start at 5 after. So 30, X35, X05, and so they're either 25 minutes long or 55 minutes long. We can accomplish what we need to accomplish in 25 minutes versus 30 minutes every time. But by starting at 5 minutes after, what those 5 minutes at the top of the hour allow you to do is to do those transitions, uh, go through your emails and get things that need to be responded to quickly. And then when you jump into the meeting, you're focused for the 25 minutes. You're not popping and replying to emails or messages. And that small change has increased joy in our collective teams immensely, that it's sort of been now something that's been permeating across the organization. But I would just say, think about that, especially if you tend to be in a lot of online meetings.
Very good. Very good. Any other, we got a couple minutes left. Any other tips or steps that you would recommend people to take to improve their focus?
So again, reemphasize. I think you just have to recognize that this is, a multiple marathons, and you're not going to um, solve this and become a focus guru overnight. That's not the intention. Is to make those incremental changes over time, and you have to find what works for you. Right, I throw out some ideas that I've fine tuned, but that was after a lot of failed learning. And so tinkering, learning, listening, and reading are all, and sort of implementing with the notion that 90% of these things are going to fail for you, but those 10% things that you do implement are going to, I think, will be life changing, is the right way to approach this.
Good. So set a low expectation, a low bar, make some forward progress. And I think I would also add to that, take joy in that progress. Don't wait until you've figured out how to sit down and focus for 8 hours consecutively before you celebrate. You should really any forward progress you make is worth celebrating on that too. So I think start small and enjoy those small wins and really allow yourself to celebrate those. I think it'd be immensely helpful. And then when you start to enjoy that progress, that just motivates you to do more and you keep going the next step. And this is a thing too that I think is a journey and not a destination. We're never gonna get to the point where we just say, I am the ultimate focus champion. I have nothing else to work on in my life. It's an ongoing process that we have to live out day after day. So we should view it as a process rather than just a destination. Well, Manish, this has been great talking with you today. I really appreciate you taking the time and letting us lean on all of your expertise. I'd like to take a quick minute to summarize things. So I've been taking notes as we were talking, and I kind of want to run through some of the highlights on my notes of things I learned from you. So initially, we talked about defining focus as being present in that moment and choosing what you pay your attention to and blocking out all of the other things. And I think some key components that you pulled out is that it needs to be voluntary, so something that you choose to do. It should be sustained for a period of time, and that time can be small to start, but eventually will get bigger. And you want to very intentionally allocate your attention to it. So it's something that's not haphazard, that it's done very intentionally. There are a lot of reasons to focus. So getting your work done faster is one that's obvious, but we also talk about that's really how we improve and how we grow. Tasks get easier when we focus on them. You're less stressed. You can be more creative. You have more joy, less burnout. So the reasons for doing it, I think, are pretty immense. I also liked how you talked about this really needs to be an individualized thing. So each person is different. And even within that same person, the morning version of you is probably different than the evening version of you. And the 20-year-old version is different than the 60-year-old version. So be really honest with yourself about who you are, where you are in life, where you are during the day as well. I think all of those things can help. You mentioned that the only commodity we have in life is time. So time management is at the key of this. And then you gave us a great list of different things that people can be doing to start taking some first steps in that. And I'll mention those again at the end. So that's kind of my summary. I'd like to flip it to you, give you a chance to summarize. So we answered these three big questions quite nicely, I think, over the last 45 minutes or so. But now I'm going to give you a chance to give kind of rapid fire answers here. So the first big question, what is focus and why is it so important for our productivity and joy?
Yeah, I think that's it. Is that focus is you optimizing both productivity and joy. So those two things don't have to be at odds with each other. It's actually where focus and flow are at a point where those things are optimized in and of itself.
Second big question, why do we all seem to struggle to focus in today's world?
Yeah, I think it's the numerous roles that we play, the multitude of things that are pulling and tugging for our time, and our ever connectedness of society, whether it's our cell phones in our pockets or in our hands all of our times, or almost an always on work environment. Those are all things that tug at us.
And our third one, what concrete steps can we take to improve our focus in our world of constant interruption?
Yeah, I think you have to start small. And look, if you're going to learn to paint, you're not going to paint a masterpiece overnight. But if you practice ever so small every day over years and months and decades, you can paint the Mona Lisa. Now you might not be as good as Da Vinci, but you certainly won't be able to paint the Mona Lisa.
You'll be a lot better than you were previously.
Yeah.
Well, and I like to always end this with a call to action. So, we want our listeners to learn a lot, but more importantly, we want them to start putting these things into practice in their life and actually start reaping the benefits. So for today's call to action, I'm actually going to give a menu of options for people to choose from. So after listening to this content, I want you to, in our third section, Manish gave us several examples. I'm going to add a couple more on here. So I want you to pick one of these things and then go do it. Try to do it for at least a week. Only pick one. Don't try to do two of these. Just pick one thing off the list. So the first one is going to be clean your desk or work area. Keep it clean for a week. See how that impacts you. The second is start blocking time on your calendar. So add in that time, that focus time that you need before a meeting, after a meeting, or totally separate, whatever you want. Add in some focus time. Third option, spend some time in nature, and I would say do this without any media around you. So leave your phone at home. Try to go no music, no screens, no nothing, just you and nature, and you can start small. And then the last two, I'm going to give you. One is sit down and read a book, a real book, without putting it down, without answering a text message or picking up your phone. Try to see if you can do that for 30 minutes and see how challenging that is. And also, an even easier one, maybe you can start here, sit down and watch a movie without stopping. Don't change the channel. Don't get up. Don't look at your phone. Check the news. Don't research things. Actually, just pay attention and watch the movie. So some of those things are going to be super easy, low-hanging fruit, but you'd be surprised at how many of those can be really difficult. So pick one of those items, try it over the course of the next week, see how it goes. Once you master that, then add in another one and then keep growing for there. So to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. Our topic today was the power of focus, how to lock in an increasingly distracted world. Manish Goyal was our expert to join us today. Manish, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciated having you on today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a fun topic.
Good. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you again for joining us. Remember to live intentionally, consistently better. Keep striving to be the best human you can be and never stop optimizing. Thanks for listening to the Mayo Clinic Human Optimization Project. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps others find us. Know someone who might benefit? Share the episode with them to join us in our mission to help as many people as possible become the best humans they can be. Have feedback or a topic idea? Email us at optimize@mayo.edu. And be sure to look for us on Instagram, X, and YouTube.
This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon for medical, professional, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified professional for any questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions expressed by the guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity is for informational purposes only and does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.